Hi, welcome to Listen2Riches. Today, I'd like to share with you a book titled, The Courage to be Disliked. This is a work by the renowned philosopher Ichiro Kishimi, where he delves into the ideas of another remarkable figure. The first of these remarkable individuals is the author of this book, Ichiro Kishimi himself. He is a highly respected Japanese philosopher who, at the age of 30, encountered the teachings of another exceptional figure, Alfred Adler's psychology. From that point onward, he wholeheartedly immersed himself in the profound study of Adler's philosophy. The Courage to be Disliked introduces Kishimi's findings on Adlerian psychology. Alfred Adler, originally known as Alfred Adler, was an Austrian psychologist who was contemporaneous with Sigmund Freud and initially a follower of Freudian thought. However, he later became the first to challenge Freud's theoretical framework, leading them to part ways due to their differing perspectives. In essence, while Freud believed that your current circumstances are shaped by past experiences, your environment, and other people's influence, Adler held a different view. He argued that your present situation is solely determined by yourself. As a result, Adler pioneered the field of individual psychology. After reading this book, I am convinced that the era we live in today is particularly apt for re-evaluating Adler's ideas. This is because our current age is marked by rapid developments in both technology and thought, necessitating continuous adaptation. For example, we often witness many young and promising individuals achieving great success and recognition early in life, but they struggle to sustain it once the applause and accolades fade away. This is because they haven't built an internal sense of self-worth. Adler's philosophy teaches us that success and happiness are self-determined, unrelated to others. Adler's ideas can help you establish this internal sense of self-worth. You might think this sounds like self-help jargon, but it's not. Adler's ideas are based on rigorous logical deduction, and his conclusions not only make sense but also withstand deep scrutiny and debate. What's more, in this book, Ichiro Kishimi adopts a format reminiscent of philosophical classics like The Analects and The Republic. The entire book is a dialogue between a young person and a philosopher, with the young person asking questions and the philosopher providing answers. The choice of this format not only makes Adler's ideas easy to comprehend but more importantly, it serves to convey that Adler's ideas transcend the field of clinical psychology. He was both a thinker and a philosopher. This book delves more into the philosophical aspects of his ideas. Next, I'll share this book with you in two parts. The first part will explore the reasons behind unhappiness, and the second part will delve into how to attain the so-called courage to be disliked, which, according to Adler, is the key to finding freedom and happiness. Alright, let's delve into the first part. According to Adler, whose fault is it that we are unhappy? Where do our troubles stem from? Before addressing this question, it's necessary to discuss one of Adler's core ideas. That is, you can make choices for yourself. Specifically, your life is not bestowed upon you by others. Rather, it's the result of your own choices. Your choices are unrelated to anyone else, and they have nothing to do with past experiences. This fundamental distinction sets Adler apart from Freud. For instance, in this book, the author mentions a female student who suffers from social anxiety and turns red in social situations. She expressed a strong desire to overcome this fear of blushing. The philosopher asked her, "What would you do if you were cured of this fear of blushing?" She replied that there was a boy she liked and wanted to date, but because of her blushing issue, she had been too afraid to confess her feelings. She also mentioned that as soon as her fear of blushing was cured, she would confess to him. Upon hearing this, your initial reaction might be, "Who or what caused this girl's unhappiness?" You might think it could be a result of childhood humiliation, leading to a fear of strangers, or perhaps she had suffered severe emotional wounds in past relationships. If that's what you think, Freud would likely agree with your perspective. He would attribute her current unhappiness to past experiences, especially childhood psychological trauma, which seems quite reasonable. However, Adler sees it differently. Adler believes that attributing everything to past causes leads to an absolute determinism, where our present and even future are entirely determined by past experiences, making them seemingly unchangeable. This viewpoint is called determinism. In contrast, Adler advocates for a teleological perspective. Teleology would argue that the reason the girl suffers from a fear of blushing and cannot overcome it is not because she hasn't found the right treatment yet, but because she has chosen this unhappiness for herself. How does that work? In Adler's view, what the girl fears most and wants to avoid at all costs is rejection by someone she cares about, along with the potential emotional blow and self-doubt that can accompany heartbreak. However, as long as her fear of blushing exists, she can tell herself that the reason she can't be with him is because of this fear. This way, she doesn't have to summon the courage to confess, and even if she faces rejection, she can convince herself otherwise. More importantly, she can cling to the fantasy that if this condition were cured, she could have love in her life, living in a world of what-ifs. Of course, this fear of blushing is a real condition, not a mere product of her imagination, but she is still making the choice herself. Using this example, let's briefly revisit Adler's core idea. Adler asserts that your current unhappiness is precisely because you have chosen it for yourself, and the reason you can't change it is because you have resolved not to change it. Now let's discuss a phenomenon we're all familiar with: feelings of inferiority. Adler was the first to explain this concept in terms of self-esteem, particularly feeling worthless when comparing oneself to others. By the way, Adler was the first person to interpret feelings of inferiority in this way. He used the German term Minderwertigkeitsgefühl, which also means a sense of inferiority. It's a term related to self-worth, signifying feeling unworthy or insignificant. In Adler's view, actually, everyone experiences feelings of inferiority, but having such feelings isn't necessarily a bad thing. Why? Adler argues that as human beings, we all exist in a state of inherent inadequacy, and each person hopes to break free from this sense of powerlessness. Consequently, everyone pursues superiority and strives for progress. When a toddler learns to stand, it's an expression of the pursuit of superiority. When they learn to communicate through language, it's another pursuit of superiority. Throughout human history, scientific advancements have occurred because of the pursuit of superiority. In essence, feelings of inferiority serve as a driving force for individuals to continuously strive for excellence. Feelings of inferiority constantly remind people of their shortcomings, prompting them to make continuous efforts to improve. However, you've likely encountered people in your life who, due to their feelings of inferiority, become exceedingly negative. They believe they can't do anything and are stuck in a cycle of self-defeat. How does this happen? According to Adler, this isn't true feelings of inferiority, but rather an inferiority complex. An inferiority complex refers to a situation where some individuals use their feelings of inferiority as an excuse. They may claim that because they are not physically attractive, they can't find a partner, or because they lack education, they can't succeed. This kind of sweeping conclusion that attributes inability to one specific factor like A is beyond the scope of mere feelings of inferiority. It becomes an inferiority complex. Moreover, Adler strongly emphasizes that this inferiority complex is also a choice made by the individual. Now you might wonder why someone would choose to embrace an inferiority complex as their shield. In one sentence, it's because they seek to avoid getting hurt in their relationships with others. According to Adler, interpersonal relationships are the source of all troubles and negative emotions. Why is that? Just think, if one's goal is to avoid getting hurt in a relationship, what would most people do? It's quite simple. They would transform into someone who constantly focuses on their own flaws, refraining from engaging in interpersonal relationships as much as possible. By retreating into their shell, they can minimize their interactions with others. In case of rejection or harm from others, they can console themselves with the idea that they were rejected because of their flaws, and as long as they didn't have those flaws, they would be likable. In essence, as long as they choose to use their own misfortune as a weapon, they will perpetually require that misfortune. Besides the inferiority complex, another common psychological issue Adler identifies in relation to interpersonal relationships is the superiority complex. It involves constantly comparing oneself to others and showing off one's superiority. Such individuals typically want to establish their uniqueness by outdoing others in everything. Are these people happy? Certainly not. As soon as they perceive someone surpassing them, they become anxious and uneasy, even resorting to any means to regain their sense of superiority. As you can see, anyone navigating the complexities of social networks experiences troubles. Adler claims that all troubles stem from interpersonal relationships. To eliminate these troubles, one might have to be the only person living in the universe. This concludes the content of the first part. Adler believes that all troubles originating from interpersonal relationships are not determined by past experiences, but rather by the meanings we ascribe to those experiences. Your current situation is a result of your own choices. From this perspective, Adler's psychology is a psychology of courage. If you're someone striving to overcome challenges, if you're not content with your current state and are striving to scale new heights in life, you need the courage to actively assign meaning to your past experiences. You need the courage to actively choose change. You also need the courage to be disliked in various relationships. In the following second part, we will delve into how to acquire this courage to be disliked and find a state of happiness and freedom. Starting from the premise that all troubles originate from interpersonal relationships, Adler posits that each person faces three major life tasks: the task of work, the task of friendship, and the task of love. At first glance, you might wonder if these three major tasks can be addressed without focusing extensively on others within our complex social networks. Does it mean that managing these three tasks effectively requires expending significant effort on maintaining relationships with those around us? Not at all, says Adler. He contends that successfully addressing these three major tasks is not dependent on others but on oneself. Adler aims to help us establish a comprehensive system of self-worth from within. Building this system involves concrete actions but is primarily a psychological endeavor. Let's start by discussing the practical aspect. We'll begin with a common scenario: a child who doesn't enjoy studying, doesn't pay attention in class, neglects homework, and spends all their time playing video games. If you were a parent, what would you do? In most cases, you might try everything to make them study, including enrolling them in tutoring, hiring a private tutor, and, at times, resorting to disciplinary measures for unfinished homework. However, as you can imagine, these coercive measures rarely lead the child to develop a genuine love for learning. Of course, some parents may focus on cultivating their child's interest in learning. But according to Adler's philosophy, all these efforts may not be as important as you think. The first thing you should consider is not how to make your child study, but rather whose responsibility it is for the child to study. The act of learning is the child's responsibility. In contrast, when parents command their child to study, it's an unwarranted interference in someone else's responsibility. Such situations inevitably lead to conflicts. We must distinguish between our own responsibilities and those of others. As mentioned earlier, Adler believes that all troubles stem from interpersonal relationships. To elaborate further, the troubles resulting from interpersonal relationships usually arise due to unwarranted interference in someone else's responsibilities or having one's own responsibilities interfered with by others. By separating responsibilities, significant changes can occur in interpersonal relationships. You might still disagree and believe that making a child study is the duty and obligation of parents, or at least a shared responsibility between parents and the child. How could it be considered unwarranted interference in someone else's responsibility? It's quite simple, actually. When determining whose responsibility it is, you need to consider one crucial factor: who ultimately bears the consequences of the choices made. If the child chooses not to study, the consequences, such as poor grades or not getting into a good school, will ultimately be borne by the child, not the parents. Therefore, learning is the child's own responsibility. However, it's essential to note that this doesn't mean Adler's psychology advocates for a laissez-faire approach. Laissez-faire parenting is an attitude of not knowing and not wanting to know what the child is doing. Adler's philosophy is not laissez-faire. He advocates for protecting the child based on an understanding of what they are doing. Parents should always be ready to offer ample support to their children. When a child doesn't seek your assistance, avoid meddling. This is what Adler refers to as separating responsibilities. You need to differentiate between the task of helping your child succeed and the task of your child's own learning. Separating responsibilities is a crucial step in establishing an internal system of self-worth, and it serves as a specific guideline for action. Now that we've covered the behavioral aspect, let's explore how to build this stable internal system of self-worth on a psychological level. We all know that, as social beings, humans naturally seek recognition and dislike being criticized or disliked by others. Let's conduct a thought experiment based on human tendencies to seek approval and avoid rejection. To avoid being disliked by anyone, what would be the most effective approach? The answer is likely to be straightforward. You would have to watch the expressions of others carefully and pledge your loyalty to everyone around you. If you have 10 people around you, you would make promises to all 10 saying, "I will strive to satisfy you." However, please note that there is a significant contradiction waiting for you in this pursuit. When you are determined not to be disliked by anyone, you may pledge your loyalty to these 10 people. But in reality, no one can satisfy everyone, and soon enough, such promises will be exposed as empty. The consequence of this is losing credibility and causing even more personal distress. In summary, living your life to meet the expectations of others and entrusting your entire life to others is a form of irresponsibility to both those around you and to yourself. In contrast, Adlerian psychology rejects the pursuit of approval from others. Adler states that the relentless pursuit of others' approval stifles your freedom. We don't live to meet the expectations of others, and others don't live to meet our expectations. If you are constantly seeking approval and are preoccupied with what others think of you, you will ultimately live your life in the context of others. Therefore, in Adler's view, true freedom is having the courage to be disliked by others. However, this doesn't mean that being disliked by others is a state we should actively seek. Adler wants to convey that being disliked is evidence of living freely and authentically, in accordance with your own principles. To exercise this freedom, you must pay the price, which in the realm of interpersonal relationships, is not being universally accepted. In other words, whether or not someone dislikes me is my concern, but whether you dislike me is your responsibility. Finally, let's discuss how Adlerian psychology views values and happiness. Earlier, we mentioned that Adler believes interpersonal relationships are the source of all troubles. However, Adler also claims that interpersonal relationships are a source of happiness. The happiness resulting from interpersonal relationships can be of two types: lower-level happiness and higher-level happiness. Lower-level happiness is derived from comparisons within interpersonal relationships. For instance, during school, if your exam scores are higher than everyone else's, you feel happy. At work, if your income surpasses that of your peers, you experience happiness. Similarly, as a parent, if your child outperforms others, you feel content. However, Adler contends that this form of happiness can only be considered lower level. True happiness must be built upon someone else's unhappiness. Higher level happiness comes from a sense of community within interpersonal relationships. This is a key point in Adlerian psychology. According to the author, Kazuo Inamori, if you don't understand this concept, you can't truly grasp Adlerian psychology. So, what is a sense of community? It's essentially a continuous sense of contribution. Your family, school, and workplace can all be considered communities. In your family community, your happiness comes from being needed by your family members. In your workplace community, you can create value for your company, and this, too, can bring you happiness. However, we often witness individuals who, upon retirement, suddenly lose their sense of purpose because they are no longer needed. They feel unhappy. On the contrary, some wealthy individuals already possess more wealth than they could ever spend in a lifetime, yet most of them continue to work diligently. Why do they keep working? Is it because they have insatiable desires? Certainly not. What they still require is to maintain a sense of contribution to society as a whole. This happiness is not based on comparison with others. This is what Adler refers to as a sense of community, a continuous sense of value through contributions to others. However, it's crucial to note that this sense of contribution is still independent of others. Adler opposes sacrificing oneself for the community. Adler emphasizes that this sense of happiness can also manifest in invisible forms. The starting and ending points of your pursuit of happiness still revolve around yourself. Your contributions and value may be expressed within a community, but the final result remains independent of others. You don't require their affirmation or reciprocation. Here is the essence of the book: the courage to be disliked. Finally, I'd like to share my own perspective. You might notice that Adler's advocated philosophy, when applied to today's context, can be described using a more visual term, namely, closing the loop. To be precise, it's about establishing a connection within yourself, where your actions and thoughts are centered on yourself. Closing the loop means that if you praise someone, you unconsciously desire their acceptance in return. If you apologize to someone, you become particularly concerned about whether they will forgive you. However, Adler's philosophy teaches us that these external validations are not important. What matters is whether you genuinely believe that what you're doing is right and meaningful. I once read an article by Wang Weigang titled, "Elite Level Apology." In it, he discussed how elite individuals approach apologies. They don't focus on whether they can regain trust. Instead, they contemplate what kind of person they want to become. Elite apologies revolve around the personal lessons learned and progress made from a given situation. They don't try to control whether the other person forgives them. They only control themselves. Perhaps this is the essence of what our era needs most: an elite mindset. The book's author, Ichiro Kishimi, also mentioned that to truly understand Adler's psychology, you need to dedicate half the time you've lived, which means if you start learning at 40, it would take 20 years to master. A 20-minute audiobook is not enough to fully encompass Adler's philosophical ideas. If you're interested in this theory, I encourage you to read the original book, which can be found on the Get Nugget ebook platform. If you discover any valuable ideas within the book, or have your thoughts to share, please feel free to do so in the comments section. This concludes the essence of the book, and I encourage you to share this book freely with friends who are interested in mental health. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you all. See you in the next episode.